Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 186. I'm Enigmaeus, and today we're continuing with the USS Discovery build. We had a bit of a detour in the last episode so that we could get set up to build in space. And now we're set up and we're building in space. Just like we promised. This episode begins with a lobotomy, starting with the top section of the sphere that we were working on in episode 184. We need to remove the top bit because we're putting the bridge in, and the bridge basically sits in its own sort of almost dome-like structure atop the sphere that makes up the center of the saucer section. So we need to make room for that, and also it's on a little bit of an angle, the cut across the sphere. So what I did, you'll see it every once in a while as we kind of zip past it, is I set up a bunch of lines or line segments together, forming a single line on an angle that sort of represents the angle that I wanted to try and remove this at, so that it kind of stays as true to the original as we could, understanding of course it is a voxel universe, and angled lines are just a bunch of segments of lines strung together at different offsets, and that's how we get to that. As you can see here now, we've got the top of the sphere is removed. We've just basically put in the floor of the bridge. That quick and easy, just goes in no problem. And now I'm looking at the structural elements, the things that are not glass or transparent aluminum as it might be in the Star Trek universe. The whole idea here is that this is, when you look at the bridge and the little dome, it almost looks like it fits in with the sphere, the shape of the sphere itself, almost as if you had a sphere and then you chiseled away at it and revealed the bridge kind of thing. But I say almost because the more I looked at it from as many different angles as I could find, the more I realized that it's not quite. It's a little bit taller than that. So in order to get everything in place, unfortunately, the diagrams that I have for trying to get a sense of scale for different things didn't go into enough detail in this particular part of the ship for me to be able to get an idea of exactly how things might go together. So I'm just kind of guessing at this point, going by what I've seen based on the layout, and giving myself a little bit of room if things don't line up quite the way I would like them to. If the geometry won't allow us to do what we need to do in order to duplicate the original, it's not going to be the end of the world. We can kind of move on from that. And based on that, we just put in the viewing screen, or the front window, if you will, of the bridge. Just like that. There it is. Just kind of sitting there. It's pretty rounded in the original, which we obviously can't do. We have a hard enough time doing some compound shapes with regular blocks. Doing it with glass is even harder because it's quite a few less blocks, shapes I should say, available to us with glass than with other blocks. I'd say, just guessing off the top of my head based on the number or the way things look when you bring up the glass selection menu versus any other block, there's probably about a third as many glass blocks. And I can see some of the blocks that would right away be very useful. And I'm kind of eager to see whether or not the selection of glass blocks will get an update as the development progresses. Having said all that, you're now prepped for the limitations that we might experience along the way. But really, it's going together fairly well. The whole idea here, in terms of the function, forgetting about momentarily the actual original ship, the Star Trek universe, the way things work, real life, any of those things, forgetting about those for a minute, one thing that I wanted to be certain of is that when you are standing on the floor in the bridge and looking out the window, that you would be able to see over the saucer section, even if only barely. That was one of the things that I had in mind as being very important overall to the design here, was allowing us to be able to do that. And I think we were successful. To be quite honest with you, I haven't set foot on the bridge yet to find out. I just basically had enough time to get the front structural elements done, and that was it. I had to get to editing, or I wasn't going to be able to get this out in time. That having been said, you can see what's going on here. Maybe there are sort of like ribs, you might say, coming down around the dome, the top of the dome. In the original, they're not very wide. I wouldn't say they look flimsy. They look like they have a structural purpose. But if we were to use the blocks that are available to us, and you can see I'm doing everything that I possibly can. I'm using every block I can think of to make this work. It's just too wide, these things. So I decided ultimately I would rather not have them and say I just left them off because the geometry wasn't going to work, than to have them looking hideous the way they were. And I even went so far as to try this here, using the blocks available to make it as narrow as I thought I would like it to be, and seeing if I could come up with some way to make that then curve down and follow the same profile as the ones that are just going side to side. And it wasn't happening. It was another example of one of these things that we can pretend like we made it work and say this is the best we can do, so we're keeping it, or we can look at it and say this is the best we can do, and that's why we're abandoning it. That's why we're not even going to have these elements in place. I did decide to leave the top section, that first narrow top section that I did, in place, and see how that looked with the glass. But as you'll see towards the end of this whole process, we don't keep them. We just decided to go without them. That leaves this glass dome on the top. We've already got the window on the front. That was kind of a key detail. But if we're going to have this glass dome at the top, much less one that's glowing blue, it means glass and it means a dome, which is frankly terrifying. The prospect of being able to make a suitable dome analog out of the glass blocks that are available to us are not very good at all. You see, we're starting to work with the blocks that we have and placing them in a way that I started placing them, and they were alongside the top of those little structural members that we were looking at, and I decided that they can't be flush with the top of those. There's got to be a little bit of clearance on those structural elements above the glass in order to match with the idea that I have in my mind of how this should look. So I moved it lower, and without even really thinking, I just kept using the same blocks, the ones that I needed to use up top to make everything fit together and look the way that it should. On the underside, I could have just used larger panes and put them underneath those structural elements, and the exposed areas would have looked better. Ultimately, it's going to be not that significant of a detail when we get around to the actual finished work. But right now, we're doing the easy part, and this is pretty much exactly what I was talking about when we were smoothing off the sphere, where you basically start working in bands, strips around the 90-degree marks, so 0, 90, 180, 270, all the way around the circle. It's the easiest part of a sphere because you don't have to think on too many different angles at the same time, but then it leaves these intersecting areas in the middle between all of those bands that we then have to figure out how to fill in with the blocks that are available to us and end up happy with the end result. What you can see here is if this was indicative of how the rest of this process would go, I would actually be fairly happy with it. It's looking okay. It's not going to be a perfect dome by any stretch of the imagination, but it's headed in the right direction. The difficulty is that all of the blocks that we need in order to fill in what remains of that gap are completely unavailable as glass blocks. There are things that we could do with glass still to fill in that area, but in terms of making it a dome entirely out of glass is not going to happen. It's just simply geometrically impossible. So the next step is to say, okay, well, let's fill it in with, in this case, combat steel, and see if we can't come up with, at the very least, a shape that works in this opening that we have to try and fill. And realizing that one of the limitations of the glass is that a lot of the glass blocks only represent one face. So if you were to compare that to what you would have in, say, combat steel, in combat steel you would have that face, but then you would have all the other faces above and below and around and behind and to the sides that fill in that gap, that block space, so that you don't have to worry about, first of all, how it looks in the sense of having gaps in the hull, and also oxygenation, being able to compress the area because of the gaps that are left in it by the structural elements. Whereas the glass only has that one face, so you end up with these faces that are essentially empty. They don't have any substance to them, so they don't look right and they don't work right when it comes to having a functional ship. So that's why we ended up with a situation like this, where we just can't do it with the glass. We have to do it with something a little bit more solid and something that has all of the faces covered so that we can fill everything in the way that we need to. And in the end, we came up with this, which is not bad. We're going to zoom out in a moment and you'll have an opportunity to see what it looks like. It's not complete. We're going to continue working on it in the next episode, but I'm pretty happy with the way it's going so far. So if you want to be notified about the next episode and future episodes in this and other series, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.